Okay, I absolutely do think that film criticism has a value after the film. Yes, I mean, you take a film like Mulholland Drive, for example. It's fascinating to read professional film critics' interpretations and views and reviews of Mulholland Drive after you've seen it for yourself. Just as it's interesting to read what people think of it before you see it. Was it worth seeing? And then you're going to want somebody to essentially explain it to you, or at least explain their interpretation of it to you. That's not to take away from your own interpretation of it. And a film like Mulholland Drive is open to multiple interpretations, and really that's what makes it interesting. When I was 15, I was given a copy of Danny Peary's Guide for the Film Fanatic, which is this incredible book. It's 1,500 kind of mini, they're not reviews, they're not essays, they're sort of write-ups, I suppose. 1,500 write-ups of films that this author, Danny Peary, thinks that you have to write, you have to see if you're going to think of yourself as a film fanatic. And there's another checklist in the back of that book of something like 4,600 films. And I'm 44 in a couple of days, and I've spent the last basically 30 years working my way through that book. So that's why I think of myself as a lifelong film fanatic. So I've always loved films, basically. And how is the short answer to that is by spending a lot of time on film talk boards in the late 90s, because I used to be on the Empire Film Talk Board and the Guardian Film Talk Board, and I would see films over the weekend. I'd probably go and see pretty much between six films over a weekend, quite often by sneaking from one screen to another, paying once and then sneaking into following shows. And so I'd write the reviews or my sort of opinions on the film on the website and on the talk board. And I started to meet people from the talk board, and one of them worked for W.H. Smith Online. And the short version is he offered me my first film reviewing work. And because I was writing review for W.H. Smith Online, when the website View London advertised put up posts on the talk boards, is anybody interested in writing film reviews for us? I got in touch with them and became their film reviewer. I was their film reviewer for nearly 15 years.
And did you feel when you kind of fell into the business do you think that if you were your 18 or 19-year-old self now rather than back then, that you could enter as easily?
Not in the same way, because in the late 90s, film fanatics found the internet, but everybody else, general sort of consumers and stuff it just wasn't around, the same option for them. I can't really think how I would be using the internet now as a film fan. I don't know which sites I'd be on, which talk boards. I'm obviously Twitter and Facebook and whatever, but would I be going to things beyond that and finding like-minded film obsessives on the internet? I don't know. And certainly the same things wouldn't have happened. Through posting on the Empire Film Talk boards, I also got in touch. I was also contacted by the editor of Empire at that time in like '98 or something was a woman called Emma Cochrane, and she'd just left Empire and had taken over Total Film, which was at that time like a really terrible Boise, like picture-led film magazine, and they literally did their reviews with icons for like explosions and car crashes and shootouts and stuff like that. And the more the icons the film had, the better it was supposed to be. And she'd been basically charged with turning Total Film into a viable film magazine, so basically dragging it up market, if you like. And Neon had just closed. This great film magazine called Neon had just closed, and I'd been kind of bemoaning the death of Neon on the Empire Film Talk board, and Emma got in touch and said, I'd really like to talk to you. I read what you said about Neon. I'd really like to talk to you about how we can make Total Film a better film magazine. And I basically went in and talked to her. So my first actual published work was for news pieces for Total Film based on that meeting with Emma. In fact, my first published piece was when The Phantom Menace came out. There was a story in the US press where a DJ, sort of shock DJ, had played a prank on like Star Wars fans, and he basically said on his radio show, if you want free tickets to The Phantom Menace, go to the centre of your nearest Walmart, dressed as your favourite Star Wars character, and shout, "Take me to Jabba." And thousands of people did it. So that piece had appeared, I think, in a newspaper or something, and I posted it on the Empire Film Talk board. and Emma got in touch and said, "Oh, I really like that story you posted on the talkboard. Would you mind writing that up, and we'll put that in the next issue of Total Film?" And I did about 3 or 4 pieces of that pieces for her for that. Sorry, but that's really not answering your question. Probably not. I think the thing is that when I became a film reviewer, there weren't that many other people doing it. There weren't film blogs, there weren't podcasts, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Twitter. So it was a legitimate outlet to write about film in a way that it didn't feel like everybody else was doing it already. So that's changed now, and now do I think I would be able to compete with those very passionate, very available young people trying to do it? No, probably not.
It's very hard now to imagine an editor of a magazine approaching someone because they like their tweets. It's as much as they might like their tweets. Yeah, whereas it's like pioneering days back then.
I mean, it does still happen. I mean, I have a friend that's become a film reviewer because of the quality of his film blog. So it does happen.
Do you make a living from film journalism, or do you have a day job?
I do make a living from film journalism. Yeah, that's I didn't. Sorry, let's start that again. I do make a living from film journalism. Yes, I didn't used to. It didn't used to be my only job. I used to have a day job when I worked for Review London. Initially, they only wanted a few reviews a week, and so I had to have. I think I worked as a transcriber, a freelance transcriber for a company. I used to transcribe police interviews, which is quite interesting. And prior to that, I was a TEFL teacher. When I first moved to London, I was a TEFL teacher in London, and started reviewing kind of on the side as I was doing that. And then it got that I could. I had a TV job. Through the people I met writing film reviews. I met a guy who gave me a job on a TV show called Get the Picture for Carlton Cinema for a year. And so I left teaching to do that, and then after that, by the end of that, I was making enough money from. That's not really true either, actually. Sorry. End of the TV show was when I got the transcription job. But anyway, currently you do have to supplement. It isn't. Right. I'm sorry. Let's start again.
Oh, you can stop as many times as you like.
I do make a living from film reviewing, but it's probably fair to say that it's quite difficult to make a living just from writing film reviews these days. You have to be able to do other things. So I supplement my film reviewing work with running social media accounts, and also branching out and writing sort of other film-related features. I mean, it's quite a lot of my work a lot of the jobs I do is writing those kind of listicle pieces, sort of 10 reasons to see such and such a film, or 10 great cycling movies, or those kinds of pieces that you see everywhere at the moment.
I'm going to sort of get towards what film criticism sort of is and what the nuts and bolts of it are, but before we do that, maybe we can address what it isn't. Are there any kind of popular misconceptions out there about film criticism that you'd like to challenge here, or just that get your go? Like, what is it that people think about film critics that's just wrong?
Probably the obvious answer to that is the thought that anybody can do it. Like, anybody who's seen a film can therefore be a film critic on the internet. That's not really true. You have to have knowledge and passion and be able to contextualize what you're seeing. And so if I see the latest film by Martin Scorsese, and you need a working knowledge of the rest of Martin Scorsese's filmography in order to place it alongside those, at least in context. And also you have to have a sense of humour. You have to be able to be entertaining in your writing as well. And not everybody, it's very clear that in reading other reviews that not everybody has a sense of humour. The other misconception, I think, and perhaps it's not quite on the lines of what you were asking, but the thing that annoys me is when you hear people say that film critics are just people who they're failed filmmakers, or they're filmmakers that never got the chance to become filmmakers. I don't think that's true. I'm sure there are critics that harbour desires to write screenplays and desires to direct and stuff like that, but for the most part that's not true. Film critics are people who love film, who are obsessed with film, who enjoy writing about film, enjoy seeing 500 films a year or what have you. It's just not the same thing. You couldn't be a director and see all the films you'd want to see as a film critic.
Plus, we're at the other end of the process. We're part of the filmmaking process. We deal in finished products. That's it's our business.
And I think that perhaps there's an argument where you see so many terrible films that maybe you think, well, I could do a better job than that, and you try and write a screenplay. But that's really not the way the filmmaking process works.
I guess in part you've already addressed this, but I'll ask it nonetheless. What is film criticism like? What do you think it's? What do you think it's for? What are its values? Why does it even exist?
I think there is a useful distinction to be made between film criticism and film reviewing, and so the majority of my work is probably film reviews. So I write for kind of entertainment websites is probably the easiest thing to say. So something like Virgin Media, or when I wrote for View London was a listings website that where the reviews were meant to be as sort of next to the film listings. So that's really a consumer review. It's basically for somebody who goes to View London thinking, what's on at the cinema this weekend? Oh, these films. What's that like? Is that any good? And that was my job, to basically give a rundown of whether a film is worth seeing or not at the end of the day. That's not the same as writing for Sight and Sound, where you're attempting to do something more analytical with a film, and in the same way, so the audience for somebody wanting to read Sight and Sound isn't going to go to View London to read film reviews, or Virgin Media to read film reviews, and vice versa. Somebody who just wants to know what's on in the cinema isn't necessarily going to open a copy of Sight and Sound. So, what is film criticism? Film criticism is analysing and contextualising works. For works by directors. Fucking hell, sorry. What did I say before?
You said film criticism is analysing and contextualising.
Contextualising and entertaining. Okay. What is film criticism? Criticism is analysing, contextualising, and entertaining when writing about film. So putting the films of Martin Scorsese in context alongside the rest of his filmography, or the films of a foreign director that other people might not have heard of, that kind of thing.
Okay, and obviously one of the parts of what we do is sort of evaluation, like determining whether a film is, judging whether a film is good or bad or worth seeing or not worth seeing. And I wonder, I know it's what you do because I know it's what we all do, but I wonder how important a part of film criticism you think it is. Like, is it something that makes you shudder, or is it the thing you most relish doing when you write your pieces?
The book I mentioned earlier, Danny Peary's Guide for the Film Fanatic, he lists, like I said, 1,500 write-ups and 4,600 in a checklist, and he pointedly includes films that are flat out, that everybody agrees are flat out terrible, but he nonetheless sees that you have to see those movies you basically have to be aware of the bad movies to be able to contextualise the good movies, and also that even a bad movie has maybe something to contribute in some way. That's probably how I see things as well, in terms of I always look for a good thing in a bad movie. It's fun to trash things, but there is always something of interest. Do I enjoy giving star ratings? I'm very aware of the arguments against star ratings, and I certainly understand as a writer that if you write a review and you don't put a star rating on it, then the reader is going to have to read that review to find out what you thought of the movie. Whereas putting a sort of 5-star or a 1-star or what have you on it means that they possibly might not read the review because they know what you think of it already. But I think I do come down on the side of it is fun to give star ratings, and it is an enjoyable conversation with other critics, and it is. And as a consumer, yes, I do think it has a merit. From a purely selfish point of view, a site like Rotten Tomatoes won't put your review on the site unless it has a star rating on it, so it's useful for that. And the same in terms of publicity for the site that you write for, if the editors of your site want your site to be promoted on, say, film posters, then the PRs and distributors usually need there to be a star rating for you to appear on that poster. So there are merits, but I can also see why people might rage against it. There are certain reviewers that don't put star ratings on. Kim Newman is famously resistant to putting star ratings on things, but actually it's not Kim Newman, is it? It's Nigel Andrews, I think. No, Nigel Floyd, I think.
I mean, there are some publications that just don't have them. I think, but I mean, I guess if your publication has them, you have to toe the line. I think I know Nigel Floyd doesn't like them, but presumably for Time Out now he does.
Yeah, or one of them, it's either Kim or Nigel, but one of them basically writes a review and says you read the review, you choose.
Well, that's possible.
Yeah.
I think that's actually. Anyway, well, maybe we should move on to how since you started, what kind of changes have you witnessed in the landscape, in the media landscape?
The obvious one is the rise of film blogs, which weren't around when I started. I mean, View London was like I said, a listings website. It wasn't a blog. It wasn't a film blog. So film blogs and podcasts and Twitter and the rise of social media too has changed everything. I mean, now everybody goes onto social media and says what they think about a film, even if it's just it was great, you know.
Do you feel a certain obligation, given that this is your profession, to respond instantly on Twitter to anything from which you emerge, from any film you've just seen?
Yes, up to a point. I'm a big fan of Twitter. I perhaps don't tweet as kind of obsessively as I used to, because I have jobs running other social media sites. So I'd say if I'm tweeting, I'm quite often tweeting for work. But yes, and certainly the big films where you come out of maybe the first screening or a big screening of something that people are actually looking forward to, then yes.
And obviously, a tweet is it is a kind of criticism, but it's a very different kind of criticism from, say, a long form review. Do you consider do you craft your tweets, or do you just consider them as a sketchbook where you just kind of blurt out an idea and you get back to the real meat of the issue later?
Bit of both. I don't do. People like Guy Lodge and Matt Thrift do like very well crafted tweet reviews where they'll give the grade and then essentially a sort of 140 character review. I tend to give a reaction in a tweet rather than anything. I mean, I am a lifelong film fanatic, so I still have an excitement about what films are coming out and when, and so I'm looking forward to. I mean. I'm a Marvel fan too, so I look forward to the Marvel movies. So Ant-Man, for example, I was very excited to see Ant-Man, and when I did, I really enjoyed it, and so I said so. Literally just put a post up this morning on a blog called Mostly Film about looking at what the Ant-Man movie took from the comics and what have you. So yes, I perhaps not as much as I did in the earlier days of Twitter, but I certainly feel compelled to join in. Let's say in a film, if people are tweeting their reactions to a certain film, yes, I want mine to be out there too.
Have you? This is not for the documentary, but I'm just curious. Have you ever used a phrase in a tweet that you then think you can't resist using in your review?
Yes, I have, and unashamedly so. I mean. Yeah, sometimes it's just too good. Sometimes, and you said, do I craft them? Yes, I do craft them in terms of working out, in terms of making sure they read properly and they're maybe funny and they fit the character limit. Yes, and take out if it's too long, I'll change ands to pluses and that kind of thing. But yeah, sometimes if your best line is in a tweet, then I don't feel that that means I can't use it in a review.
Okay, so all these are, with the rise of social media and with the rise of kind of online, I guess kind of things like blogs and podcasts, but also aggregators and things like Rotten Tomatoes. Do you think that all of these things that are out there online, how do you think that they affect and impact upon criticism itself? And do you think that they've been a good thing or a bad thing or somewhere in between for sort of the art of film criticism?
I think somewhere in between. I see the value of promotion personally as a Twitter and Facebook. I have something like 8,000 plus followers on Twitter, and and I've been on Facebook since 2007. So I see a strong value in promoting my own, in just putting out, alerting my friends and followers to reviews I've written. It's very useful the tool for self-promotion in that way. And I've definitely had work come to me through being on Twitter and Facebook that I wouldn't have got otherwise. In the same way that through being on Twitter, I've met plenty of other film reviewers in London, and some of those film reviewers have become editors and have offered me work based on purely being in a social network, literally a social network. And I'm very grateful to Facebook and Twitter for both of those things. That's not really answering your question. Yes, I see the value for, a sort of database of links, if you like, so when Robbie Collin has written his review of whatever for the Telegraph, he tweets it, and as soon as it goes up, he tweets it, and you get instant readership that way. It's very useful for that. Obviously, it's impossible to have an in-depth film discussion in 140 characters each. I mean, it's pointless to do that. Perhaps that happens on Facebook. I'm not so familiar with the kind of there must be Facebook groups for dedicated film fanatics on Facebook, but I'm not a part of that, so I can't really say what goes on there. And certainly, I don't know if film talk boards, the way they existed in the late 90s and early 2000s, don't exist in the same way. The Guardian killed our beloved Guardian Film Talk Board a couple of years ago, and there is a replacement, but it's not the same thing. What was I saying?
You said earlier that one of the misconceptions you thought there was about film criticism is that it's not true that everyone can be a critic. It's not sort of a straightforward process to become a critic and to do what you do. In a sense, the internet makes it much easier for everyone at least to believe that they can be a critic, in that it provides, and now I'm not talking about Twitter or Facebook, but I'm talking about blogs and personal blogs. That provides a platform where literally anyone can publish anything at any length that they like on cinema. It's never been easier. And also things like Letterboxd, which just invites people to publish what they think on any given film. Do you see this as just expanding the conversation that we all have in culture about cinema? Or is this instead or additionally a threat to the film critic?
I think it's a threat in terms of the amount of film writing that's available on the internet means that it's less profitable to newspapers and magazines to publish film pieces because there's a wealth of material out there already. I don't think it's a replacement. I don't think it's a threat to film criticism in that way. I don't think film criticism will die because of people writing reviews on Letterboxd and what have you. Hang on, can you ask the question again?
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, given that it's easier than ever now online for anyone to publish whatever they like about films, is this a threat to the existence, at the very existential status of the professional paid critic, professional critic rather than just film critics in general?
No, in that the average writer of a review on Letterboxd or Twitter of a film on film comment on Twitter. Sorry, no, in that the average writer of a review on Letterboxd isn't going to become the next film critic for The Guardian, or start writing or get invited to write for Sight and Sound anytime soon. So, is it a threat to film criticism in that sense? No, I don't think it is. Having said that, it's not true that everybody can become a film critic, because a film critic, or at least a film critic worthy of the title, has to have, at the very least, a large background, a working knowledge of films and film history. One of the things that frustrates me most about, I'm friends with plenty of young film bloggers and film writers, some who write for free and some who are starting to make a living from it. and it frustrates me enormously, even within professional film critic circles. There are people that have not seen, classic Hollywood movies and thousands of classic Hollywood movies. And for me, you need to be immersed in that kind of thing to understand film history and to be able to place and contextualize films in film history. You don't get that from I don't want to name names or list film blogs, but certain writers for certain film blogs won't have seen anything. Their favourite film will be The Goonies, and they won't have seen a film before 1975. It's classic film to them is the 70s, films from the 70s. And it struck me recently that actually a classic film to somebody today is the same as what a classic film to me was when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, the classic films were films in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And now, that same time period is the 70s and the 80s. So that's gave me something to think about, let's put it that way. So actually they are immersed in classic film history. It's just that classic film history is a different time period now than it was then. And they don't, well, it kind of has, yeah. I mean, in the short term, freelance rates are getting slashed all the time, so it's very difficult to make a living from it. I mean, I was invited to talk to a class of sixth formers recently, and for career advice or whatever. And the first thing I said to them was, if you're thinking about making a career as a professional film critic, don't. It's very difficult. I asked several film critics to say, what should I say to you? What should I say to you? And they all said the same thing: don't do it. You can't make a living from it, and really, you can't make a suitable living from it, really. And that's only getting worse. Paid positions are becoming more and more scarce, and people willing to write about films for very little money or for free are in their multitudes. I mean, it's going to get to a point where newspapers and magazines will just think, well, why are we paying you this amount of money when we could pay this guy half what we're paying you, and he'll do not quite as good a job, but not that bad a job either. I know that the circulation figures for Total Film and Empire are constantly on the decline, and I think it's always rumoured that Total Film is not far from going under, and I think that's probably going to happen within the next 5 or 10 years. It's very hard to keep a film magazine viable these days.
Empire, that's incredible, because Empire is the most successful film publication in the world, I believe.
Yeah, Empire, but even Empire still has declining sales figures, and the other thing is that Empire just can't compete with the internet in terms unless you just drop the film news section from Empire, you're essentially printing news that's a month old by the time you come to publication. I saw a really interesting, a really great documentary at the Edinburgh Film Festival called Newsroom Off the Record. It's a Danish documentary about a tabloid that's basically suffering severely declining circulation figures, and they're desperate to kind of come up with solutions. And one of those solutions is launching a paid version of the website, a paid version of the newspaper online. And there's this anecdote that's told in that documentary where the editor is reading the newspaper at his breakfast table, and his daughter is on her phone, and he's sort of saying, "Oh, you're always put your phone down. You're always on your phone at the breakfast table." And she says, "Oh, I'm doing the same thing you are. It's just that you're reading yesterday's news, and I'm reading today's news. I'm on the same site that you are, the New York Times or whatever." And that's a really valid point. Like film obsessives and the accessibility of film news and film writing on the internet, on phones and laptops and iPads and what have you, means that you're not going to go to a film magazine for film news anymore. You're going to get it from a trusted news source elsewhere. So, and Empire's film reviews are all online, and mostly all online by the time Empire goes to press. So, because they need to have their review out there when the films get seen and when the embargoes lift.
So, does that? Am I right in understanding from what you're saying that the implication of what you're saying is that that print is on its way out? I mean, it might take a while. But,
in terms of film magazines, yes, I think so. I don't know anybody who doesn't think so. It's all that is the way things are going. Newspapers, 5-10 years, newspapers. I wouldn't be surprised if newspapers dropped their in-print film coverage and just had it online instead. But then that's a whole death of print conversation, isn't it? Like in general, not just as applies to film criticism. Something like Sight and Sound can exist on its own, I think, because Sight and Sound has a very low subscription rate anyway. They don't have the numbers of Empire, but yet they manage to continue on.
Sight and Sound, though, is heavily
subsidised. Well, exactly. But I mean, I think it's worthwhile to the BFI. As long as the BFI continues, I can see Sight and Sound's continuing, because it's worthwhile to the BFI to have a magazine like Sight and Sound that will write articles about its seasons and what have you. But that's a separate issue.
If the state were to cut funding to the BFI, which it often does, and which it could do at any moment, certainly this particular government, Sight and Sound could go overnight.
That's very true.
I don't know. It's not like I have insider knowledge, but that would be my guess. That's entirely dependent on subsidies. It can't exist in its own right from sounds. So that would be interesting. But getting back to what you said earlier about you mentioned that there's a difference between reviewing and criticism. You were just saying that, and I'm just trying to tie these things together. You were saying that the advantage that online publication has over print publication is that it's always instant. The things can be posted immediately as soon as they come in. You don't have that delay effect that you get when you're printing out something. And I wonder how that ties in with a different way in which reviews and criticism are sometimes viewed by users, by the actual readers. Do you think that criticism has a value after the event? In other words, after the film has been seen? Or do you think that criticism is really only for people considering seeing a film?
I absolutely think that criticism has a value after the film has been seen. Yes, there are some great writers who I would absolutely, if you see a film that's I'm trying to think of a good example for a film. Okay, I absolutely do think that film criticism has a value after the film. Yes, I mean, you take a film like Mulholland Drive, for example. It's fascinating to read professional film critics' interpretations and views and reviews of Mulholland Drive after you've seen it for yourself. Just as it's interesting to read what people think of it before you see it. Was it worth seeing? And then you're going to want somebody to essentially explain it to you, or at least explain their interpretation of it to you. That's not to take away from your own interpretation of it. And a film like Mulholland Drive is open to multiple interpretations, and really that's what makes it interesting. Films that don't offer an easy interpretation, there's absolute value in reading film critics' responses to that. And actually that's one of the key values of film criticism is exactly that purpose, writing about film in an informative and entertaining and educational way. But I think there are two. I mean, and also it works the other way too. Like if you already know that you want to see Ant-Man, in the lower level of that scale of things, if you already know that you want to see the latest Marvel superhero movie, say for example the Avengers, then you're probably not going to read reviews because you already know you're going to go and see it, and you are possibly afraid that somebody might spoil details in a review. And plenty of people do that. So you're going to go and see the film, and then you're going to read all the reviews afterwards. And part of that is to see what other people think of it, and part of it is to see whether people agreed with your opinions on it, or how people disagreed with your opinions on it, and that kind of thing. And I think that has a value too. So yes, I think it's that works at the two different ends of the scale. And the same, I mean, that's not to say that it is illuminating in that respect to read what the film bloggers think of Avengers as it is to think of what The Guardian thinks of the Avengers. And film bloggers tend to have I mean, I'm generalising, but film blogs do tend to have a sort of slant towards pop culture material like comic book movies and things like that, and horror movies and things. So it is just as interesting to read those reviews of superhero movies as it is to read the professional reviews of superhero movies.
I've got one last question, but this is an incredibly open-ended question. What haven't we addressed that you want to address about film criticism? Like, is there anything that you want? Because this is your platform, basically, to say. I know that's a very hard question.
Well, I covered the thing about. I mean, my main frustration is, like I said, it annoys me that people don't have that background of. The majority of the younger film critics don't have that background of film history and film knowledge. I mean, I see between 400 and 500 films a year every year, and that's not just. And you need to. There does need to be a sort of obsession, a level of obsession, to really. You couldn't be a professional full-time critic without some level of obsession with film in some way, I think. And but then having said that, I meet plenty of the sort of older film critics who are completely jaded and just really hate sitting through, the latest, Adam Sandler comedy or what have you. And I suppose I've been doing this for like I said, nearly 15 years, just over 15 years, and watching films obsessively since I was 15, and I haven't lost my kind of love of cinema generally, but I would include the trashy blockbusters and the essentially terrible films in that category. Like, okay, so I'm not excited about I'm not a particular fan of Adam Sandler movies, for example, or Tyler Perry movies or what have you, but I'll still go and see them.
So you're an omnivore.
Yes.
That omnivorousness is a kind of an essential quality of.
I think it's you. I certainly think it doesn't hurt. It means I'm not annoyed with my day job the way that certain jaded people in our profession are. I'll sort of joke around, dreading, if something looks like it's going to be terrible, I'll sort of sit there and kind of go, oh, this is going to be awful, isn't it, or something. But that doesn't mean that I don't on some level still want to see it. Sometimes the other thing is, the bad films are the ones that it's most fun to write about. So it's always going to be worth seeing a bad movie for that reason alone. That's the other great advantage of the job as a film fan, is that you get to see everything for free. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Something like Fright Fest there is something I wanted to say. I don't know how to phrase it properly. One of the questions you sent me was what. There was one about. It was one you sent me about what's the value, or what do you personally. I can't remember what the phrasing was.
Oh, what do you regard as the most important parts or parts of your work? Is that one? Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I most love about film reviewing is, and my position as a film reviewer, is to be able to bring a small film that nobody's heard of to wider attention, and that's a great. That also ties into what you were saying about Twitter and Facebook and social media generally. To be able to bring people's attention to a film that otherwise they may not have heard of is really rewarding. And generally, just being able to recommend films to people and have them follow those recommendations and go and see a film because you said it was good, that's an enormous reward in the job. But specifically, I go to the Edinburgh Film Festival every year. I've been going to the Glasgow Film Festival for the last kind of 3 or 4 years. I've been to I've been to the San Sebastian Film Festival 3 years in a row, for example. And one of the things I love about going to film festivals is exactly that, being able to find a film that doesn't yet have a UK distributor, but that people should definitely seek out and enjoy. And that it hasn't happened often, but I have been in a position where I've been able to recommend a film on Twitter and social media and have distributors be interested based on that recommendation. That's easier with something like documentaries, where there's a company called Dogwoof that specialises in documentaries. So if you see a good documentary and you bring it to Dogwoof's attention, then there's a possibility. They will almost certainly see it based on that. alone, and whether they pick it up after that is really up to them. But it's great to be in a position to alert people to those films.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I don't think I've ever influenced a distributor to pick up a film yet. But I've got terrible taste,
I've certainly... Yeah, I mean, it's great when they don't have... I certainly try and do that. Well, I mean, that's not to say that they come to me for it or anything. I mean, I would love a job as a film programmer, for example. But it is a definite benefit of going to festivals, and obviously the programmers for those festivals have already done that. I'm sure the programmers get listened to more than I do, and the programmers will also be pushing those documentaries out. But as a film reviewer, it's possible for me to excite audience interest, and that excitement of audience interest will be attractive to film distributors, and that's a definite advantage to social media. That is something that wouldn't have happened prior to social media. I'm trying to think of a better example. There is a really great Finnish movie. Well, that Danish documentary I told you about, Off the Record, the newsroom Off the Record, doesn't yet have a UK distributor, so that's a great example.
It's still promoting it now.
Well, it's good to do that. And also the other thing we haven't talked about is Netflix, which perhaps doesn't come into film criticism. But well, actually, no, yes, it does, because you are still rolling, aren't you?
Yeah, still rolling.
The other thing we haven't talked about is Netflix, and that is important as well, because now you do have the opportunity to see those films. Those films might have gone from cinemas or what have you, and perhaps the DVDs aren't even readily available yet, but they are going to be on video on demand services. And obviously there's an enormous amount of material on Netflix now, and you need some way of filtering those things out. It's just to look at the star ratings on Netflix isn't going to be enough in itself. So if a professional film critic writes a piece on a website that basically says, here are 10 great films you should check out on Netflix, yeah, you're going to check those films out, because they're coming from a position of somebody that's seen those films in particular, and also has seen a large majority of the other films that are on Netflix, and has judged those particular 10 to be worth seeking out. So yeah, I mean, and that is a way, with distribution methods evolving, criticism, the function of criticism and film reviewing, I'm lumping them both together, I mean, I think they are, as much as you can do that, does have a real value in the age of Netflix, because it's helpful to have a sort of filtering system for what's out there that's worth seeing, that people might not have heard of. I can think of 2 great films off the top of my head that people may not have been aware of, and that I've been trying to get people to see on Netflix through Twitter and social media. One is a sort of sci-fi movie called Coherence, and another one is a sort of trippy sci-fi relationship movie called The One I Love. Both of those films, are, they would make a great double feature, exactly. And I think that in itself has great value to film fans. Unfortunately, I think the dissolve of the dissolvee is a trend. It's just not sustainable in the long run. I mean, dedicated film websites are just not sustainable without hits. I mean, that's the reality. Hits mean advertising. Advertising is still the only way to fund, without like a heavy investor that's willing to kind of essentially sink a lot of money into something that isn't going to see a return on that investment. It's just not financially sustainable, that model, which is a terrible shame. I don't know what the solution is beyond recruiting a cadre of wealthy film-loving philanthropists to basically support film blogs ad nauseam. I mean, dedicated film websites ad nauseam. I don't know. It's a terrifying thought that I mean, I hear horror stories from professionals about editors and what editors think, and it doesn't paint a very hopeful picture, basically, of the future. It is about hits, and it is about, readership and what have you. And if those things aren't there, then the money isn't there, and where is the magazine readership going, and where and why are newspapers? Where are people that were getting their film reviews from newspapers going now? They're going online, aren't they? So, how do you make money without? How do you make it a business without charging people to read online in the first place? And nobody is going to pay to read a review on one website when they can read another one for free. When they can read 50,000 reviews elsewhere for free.
But I do think that there are some readers who go online who will look for individual voices, like there'll be a particular trusted names, or a body of trusted names, or they'll go for an individual publication because they trust the publication.
I think that's true too, but I think you will, as a consumer, you will cut those trusted names and trusted publications loose if you have to pay for them online, when you know you could get them for free. You could get as good as, or at least not quite as good as, but still adequate to purpose reviews elsewhere.